From Software's games have always had deep and complex narratives, and Elden Ring is no different. But as I dug deeper, reading item descriptions, completing quest lines, and listening to other people's interpretations of the game's hard-to-piece-together story, I noticed something. A lot of events in the story are very similar to Dark Souls. Giant magical trees, ancient stony-scaled dragons, broken laws of death, and withering kingdoms are all shared themes between the two. These narrative parallels compelled me to make this video. In it, I'll explore some of the major plot points and themes in both titles, with a bit of crackpot speculation. Who knows, maybe these two worlds share more than we realize. With that out of the way, let's begin. The lands between have long served as a nexus of otherworldly forces since time immemorial, with each of these forces vying for control and spreading their influence to the land's inhabitants. Arguably the most powerful of these beings, these outer gods, is the Greater Will. It is the being that blessed the lands between with the Erd Tree, and guided the lands between into a new age, an age of gold. A golden order was established to defend the Erd Tree, and for a time, the lands between knew peace. But all ages must come to an end, and this golden age was no exception, as numerous threats to the sanctity of the Golden Order emerged, and soon the once mighty order was on the brink of destruction. Let's turn back the clock a bit, to a time before the Erd Tree, before the Golden Order, and before the Greater Will made its presence known. In the beginning, there was a tree, a great tree, a crucible of life itself, where all life was once blended together. Dragons ruled this land, their stony scales bending time. However, this era would not last, as the Greater Will set its sights on the lands between, and sent a golden star bearing a vassal to begin spreading its influence throughout. This vassal would supplant itself onto the primordial crucible, and create the Erd Tree. You can even see where the Erd Tree was grafted on. The Erd Tree would go on to serve as a nexus of the lands between, and soon the dragons would rule this land no longer. The Erd Tree bears an uncanny resemblance to Yggdrasil, the world tree of Norse mythology. Furthermore, it bears a striking resemblance to the Archtrees, gateways to other worlds, present in the Dark Souls series. The Archtrees existed before the Age of Fire, the Age of Ancients, when the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, Archtrees, and everlasting dragons with scales of stone. They are said to be gateways to other worlds, just like the World Tree's branches in Norse myth. Doesn't this sound familiar? A giant tree that existed before the beginning of a current age, in a world without shape, ruled by dragons. Now, you could call FromSoft lazy for recycling the origin myth of Dark Souls for Elden Ring, but I think it's a bit more than that. Call me crazy, go ahead, I don't care. But there's gotta be some sort of connection here. Too many things line up between both games, and it's not like VaatiVidya is gonna be fact-checking me on this. So, I'd like to present a hypothesis. Perhaps the Erd Tree is an Archtree? And furthermore, could the entire Darkblood Elden Soulsborne Ring series be connected? That's probably a stretch, but it's fun to think about. As mentioned before, in the Age of Fire there was nothing but grey crags, dragons, and Archtrees. In this primordial landscape, Gwyn and his followers waged war against the stone dragons, peeling away their immortal scales with stakes of lightning. This ancient battleground was seemingly lost to time, until a certain undead uncovered a secret passage in a rather large tree. This passage, spiraling ever downwards, eventually reaching a shoreline of a vast lake, stretching as far as the eye can see, with equally massive trees to the one we just emerged, piercing the clouded sky. This is Ash Lake, and those trees are Archtrees. Archtrees are said to be gateways to other worlds, and the one we just stepped out of confirms that. We can access the Great Hollow from Blighttown, a subterranean area in Lordran, but now we seem to be outdoors. Now, why did I say all of this? Well, at the end of the final segment of Elden Ring, after defeating the former Elden Lord, we burn away the thorns blocking our entry to the Erd Tree, and enter. Here we are faced by Radagon, the current Elden Lord, consort to Queen Marika, and possibly her alter ego? The space we fight him in is what you'd expect from the inside of a giant tree, not too dissimilar to the Great Hollow. But after we beat him, we are transported to a new area, a vast lake, with giant trees jutting out and into the foggy sky. This can't be a coincidence, right? In both games, we enter a giant hollow tree and emerge in a seemingly endless lake with giant trees obscured by a clouded sky. Sure, the colors are different, but the parallels are kind of hard to miss. Both trees existed prior to their current age of their respective games. In Dark Souls' case, the Arch Trees. These trees, as stated before, are said to be gateways into other worlds, evidenced by the chosen undead reaching Ash Lake via the subterranean Blight Town. These trees could have been where Gwyn and his followers came from, traveling through one from some dying world. Kind of like the Painted World if you think about it. The Arch Trees obviously possess some sort of power, capable of bridging the gap between worlds, and might have served as the catalyst that lit the first flame. Whatever the case, the Arch Trees were present since the beginning of human civilization, in a land governed by dragons, and will probably be present long after. In Elden Ring, the Great Tree was also present before human civilization, in a land coincidentally also governed by dragons. Just like in Dark Souls, once humans showed up, an all-out war broke out between humans and dragons. Both wars ended about the same, with the dragons on the brink of extinction and humans inheriting the earth. Also, side note, I find it hilariously ironic that the dragons in Dark Souls are extremely weak to lightning, but the dragons in Elden Ring wield it as their weapon of choice. With the Arch Trees being gateways to other dimensions, I have to wonder, can the Great Tree do the same? After humanity had established itself in the lands between, the Greater Will, as well as many other outer gods, took notice. The Greater Will sent its vassal, grafting itself onto the Great Tree, and the Erd Tree was born. But how exactly did the vassal get here? It came to Earth, or whatever the Elden Ring equivalent is to Earth, via a star, and those usually hang out in space. Traveling through space takes a long time, and the Greater Will seemed to only have discovered humanity during the Age of the Crucible, meaning it would have taken a considerable amount of time to travel to the lands between. Sure, the Age of the Crucible would have lasted long enough for the star to get there, but I propose another answer. What if, this is a very large if, the Elden Beast traveled not through space, but through dimensions? Assuming the Great Tree is an Arch Tree, the Elden Beast could have used it to reach the lands between instantaneously. Of course, this would mean that outer gods are not from outer space, but another dimension entirely. Once we, the Tarnished, near the end of our quest, we must burn away the thorns barring entry to the Erd Tree. Inside we face Radagon, seemingly our final challenge before we can claim the title of Elden Lord. However, instead of remaining at the base of the Erd Tree, we are taken to the aforementioned Plane of Water, just like Ash Lake, but gold. Aside from the coloration, everything else about the Elden Beast's arena is identical to Ash Lake. Now, I'm not saying that this place is Ash Lake, but I really don't know what else it could be. Definitely too large to be inside of the Erd Tree. This place, which I will call the Golden Lake for the sake of clarity, was reached almost the exact same way as Ash Lake, through the base of a giant magical tree. The only discrepancy is the dark sky and gold trees. Maybe it's just nighttime there? This is a joke. Why the Greater Will chose the Great Tree as the seat of its power remains a mystery. Was it its central location? Its significance to the land's inhabitants? Or perhaps the power of the Crucible? The Great Tree, prior to the Greater Will's hijacking, was host to the primordial laws of the world. This power may have been the reason the Greater Will chose it as its host. The Arch Trees also seem to possess some sort of power, albeit a different power than that of the Crucible. Would it be a stretch to say that the Great Tree, and by extension the Erd Tree, also possess the power to cross worlds? The Elden Beast practically kidnaps us and brings us to its realm. And the Elden Beast is a manifestation of the Greater Will, so I don't think it's too much of a stretch. Who am I kidding? It's a huge stretch. I sound like a madman right now. In the ancient age, before the fire, when the war with the dragons was finally won, Lord Gwyn began to construct his mighty kingdom. To start, he built a structure around the cave where he and his fellow lords found their lord souls, and the First Flame. This is the Kiln of the First Flame. In Dark Souls 1, the kiln takes a cylindrical shape, with great spires jutting out from beneath. Gwyn himself remains within, his sanity slowly slipping away. Nothing here seems to be related to trees in any way, but in Dark Souls 3 there is. With the world finally unable to sustain itself with a dying First Flame, Reality has begun to crumble, evident by the shifting terrain and fading sun. The structure surrounding the kiln has burned away, revealing a large tree stump? I really don't know what else this could be. This stump may have once been an arch tree, as the first flame was found when the world was in its primordial state. The embers of the first flame may have set the tree alight and served as kindling for the flame. This special kindling may have been the cause of the first flame growing so powerful. But all flames must eventually fade. Now Lord Ren is dying, and maybe that's for the best. The act of keeping the flame on life support was doomed to fail, distorting and corrupting the world, so maybe it's time for a new age. In the End of Fire ending, the Ashen One and the Firekeeper allow the first flame to die out, bringing about the Age of Man and ending the Age of the Gods, free from their machinations. These ideals are very similar to Elden Ring's Frenzied Flame ending. In this ending, we, the Tarnished, are branded by the Three Fingers, becoming their champion, and burn the Erd Tree to the ground, ending the Greater Will's rule over the lands between, and establishing a new age of chaos. Both endings have us effectively burn down the current world order, and bring an end to an age of stagnation. Like I mentioned before, the ancient dragons once ruled both over Lordran and the lands between, but both their ages came to an end. Despite that, some dragons remained. They communed with humans, teaching them their ways. Some dragons even started their own schools of magic, teaching humans their arts of war. But eventually they too vanished, taking many of their secrets with them. Yet their human apostles still followed their teachings. In Dark Souls 3's case, the dragon apostles sought to be everlasting like the ancient dragons themselves. They attempted to mimic their masters by using stones imbued with their power to transform themselves into something new. Sadly, this form was not everlasting in the slightest, only granting them a breath weapon and a stupid-looking appearance. Like the Wyverns, the dragon apostles can only hope to imitate the ancient dragons in a fruitless quest for immortality. Like the dragons in Dark Souls, the ancient dragons in Elden Ring made contact with humans who formed a cult around them. The dragons taught their students lightning magic, and one dragon, Lanciax, was particularly fond of a Knight of the Round Table hold. But, like the dragon apostles of Dark Souls, the ancient dragon cult did not last. I do not know what happened to the cult, probably because I missed an item description somewhere, but the dragons seem to have abandoned their followers yet again. It could have something to do with Vike, the favorite of Lanciax, and his possession by the Frenzied Flame. The people of Leyndell were not the only ones to seek the power of dragons. The people of Noxtella, the subterranean city of Ainsel River, also sought their power. But this power was to be used for a different purpose. Banished underground not long ago for invoking the ire of the Greater Will, the Noxt wished to create a Lord of Night, a lord who will bring about an age of stars. They tried several means, including creatures called Silver Tears. These creatures were amorphous blobs of an unknown substance, and could mimic the form of any creature or object, like the Orb. Their other method was more extreme. In their search for a lord, they created the Dragonkin, hulking draconic creatures most likely made from the Nox themselves in an effort to achieve the immortality of the dragons. However, this was not to be. The Dragonkin could not fly, nor could they conjure the red lightning or withstand damage like the scales of the creatures they tried so hard to imitate. Instead, they had bolts of frost and decaying bodies wrapped in bandages. They knew no sky, no immortality, and perished as decrepit, pale imitations of their skyborn kin. Like the dragon apostles of Archdragon Peak, the Nox and the dragon cultists failed to harness the power of the ancient dragons, only creating twisted perversions of the once mighty beings. At the apex of his rule, Lord Gwyn knew his age could not last forever, and saw an age of dark on the horizon, an age of mankind. He grew fearful of mankind and the power of dark within them, as they descended from the furtive pygmy, holder of the dark soul. This dark power was put on full display when Manus, once a normal human, allowed his humanity to run wild, consuming the town of Ulasil and disfiguring its inhabitants. The uncontrollable power of humanity scared Gwyn, and so he cast a seal of fire upon humanity, branding them with the accursed dark sign, banishing dark and all that stemmed from humanity. The curse manifests as a ring of fire on the flesh of the accursed, This dark sign led to what would be known as the Undead Curse, preventing anyone afflicted from dying, instead reappearing at special bonfires made from the bones of the undead. Now, this may sound nice, being unable to die while still being who you are, but after a while, the undead began to lose themselves. Their bodies began to decay, and their sanity began to slip. Those who were too far gone became hollow, echoes of who they once were, now only acting on animalistic instinct. This horrid affliction was dubbed the First Sin by Aldia, a prominent character in Dark Souls 2, and signifies the beginning of the end of Lord Gwyn's Golden Age. His kingdom's citizens slowly lost their minds, and in an attempt to contain them, he imprisoned them in an asylum, to rot away until the end of time. But this too was fruitless, as too many people had lost themselves. Gwyn's kingdom crumbled, and soon, after sealing himself in the kiln of the First Flame to guard it, he too began to go hollow. The events of Dark Souls are all too similar to the misdeeds of Queen Marika, who, in her hubris, removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, thus altering the laws of the world itself. The Elden Ring was the symbol of absolute order, and governed the natural order of the world. With the Rune of Death removed, people could not naturally die. Instead, their souls were drawn to the Erd Tree upon death, to experience some unknown afterlife. People may have stopped dying altogether, shown by the various human enemies throughout the game, with appearances similar to the hollow enemies of Dark Souls. This was not the only consequence of Marika's actions, as one of her stepchildren, Ranni the Witch, stole a small fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, Marika's ever-loyal shadow assigned to guard the Rune of Death. Disillusioned with the Golden Order, she sought to free herself from the grasp of the Greater Will and change her fate. With this fragment of death, she orchestrated a plot, along with the Black Knife assassins. Her plan was to kill her flesh and live on through soul alone. But this could not be, for that would be impossible. At least it would have been. Ranni's honestly convoluted plan involved another demigod, her half-brother Godwyn. By killing his soul in her body, she could somehow cheat the Rune of Death and fulfill its requirements for a true death. On the infamous night of the Black Knives, a half-wheel rune was carved into the backs of both Ranni and forcefully into Godwyn, an unfortunate victim of this plot. Ranni's body died, finding a new vessel, and Godwyn perished in soul alone, his body in a perpetual state of undeath. After his death at the hands of the Black Knives, Godwyn was buried at the base of the Erd Tree, a high honor in the lands between, deep below the ground. Yet all was not well. His body transformed into something unrecognizable, and his deathly miasma manifested as Deathroot throughout the lands between. The Deathroot would reanimate those who had died, and transform them into those who live in death. Those who live in death were seen as a stain on the sanctity of the Golden Order, and were hunted relentlessly. But the dead were resilient, cropping out faster than the Golden Order could cut them down, if they could even be cut down at all. With the curse of the undead upon it, the kingdom of Lordran was on the brink of destruction. But not all hope was lost. Prophets spoke of a chosen undead, who would escape the Northern Asylum and rekindle the First Flame. That chosen undead is you, or me. Whoever's playing the game, really. Whatever the case, the curse afflicting the chosen undead turned out to be a blessing, as they could never truly die, and thus could not be halted in their quest to rekindle the First Flame. After slaying Gwyn himself, the chosen undead successfully fulfilled their purpose, sacrificing themselves to the flame, prolonging the Age of Fire. Or perhaps they didn't. Why should an undead aid the very god that cursed them? The chosen undead is faced with another choice: to walk away and let the flame die out. Whatever the chosen undead's choice, the flame would continue to burn, further prolonging the already stagnant Age of Fire. Even as Lordran fell and Lothric was built upon it, the flame somehow continued to burn, as more and more undead continued to link the fire in a desperate hope of prolonging the inevitable. Soon, even the land itself began to crumble, and the sun began to bleed. A new undead, the Ashen One, is once again tasked with rekindling the First Flame. But the question is, should we? Preserve this diseased world and corrupt status quo? Or put this world out of its misery, and offer humanity a second chance? Be warned, the Ring City shows us a glimpse of what the future has in store if you do decide to kindle the flame yet again. The choice is yours. The favor of the greater will has its limits, and those deemed to not be worthy of its grace are cast out of the lands between. These are the Tarnished, and the first was none other than Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, whom Marika abandoned for Radagon. Spurned by the Golden Order, he returned to his homeland, where he supposedly died. More would soon follow. Warriors, nameless and renowned, banished from their homeland for their transgressions against the Golden Order. They all met their ends one way or another, in the lands far away. But once the Elden Ring was shattered and the power of the Golden Order began to dwindle, the grave of the Greater Will called out to the Tarnished, restoring them to life, and guiding them back to the lands between. We, the player, are one such Tarnished, and it is our duty to repair the Elden Ring, claim the title of Elden Lord, and restore the Golden Order. But we are not alone. Other Tarnished have different ideas about how the world should work. Some wish for a complete restructuring of the current system, while others wish to restore and improve the current order. Others simply want revenge for what the Golden Order has done to their people, and some simply want to burn it all down. You must decide which path is right for the world. Restore the flawed system in place, change it, or destroy it completely. The choice is yours. The undead and the tarnished, cursed by powers beyond their control, only to be tasked with saving the world that has completely forsaken them. Both must face insurmountable odds on their journeys, and die and return to life as much as it takes. The struggle and triumphs of both player characters tie into the theme of overcoming a challenge, a theme that FromSoft had in mind when creating both of these worlds, in both story and gameplay. I know FromSoft has always had some lore explanation for why the player character can never truly die, but the undeath of Dark Souls and Elden Ring mirror each other almost perfectly. There are many other minor parallels in both these games, like a flesh-eating undead woman, the ever-recurring Moonlight Greatsword, and even some outside of the Dark Souls and Elden Ring. Patches, obviously, has appeared in almost every FromSoft game since Armored Core 4, appeared most recently in Elden Ring, and will probably show up in Armored Core 6 later this year. There's also Marvelous Chester, a man from the distant future, even farther than yours, dragged into the past by Manus. He sports a strange getup with a long coat and top hat, very out of place in Dark Souls' mostly medieval aesthetic, and uses a ranged weapon and an agile fighting style. Judging by the fact that the DLC he's part of was released around the same time Bloodborne started development, Chester may well have come from Yharnam, or a place like it, in the far future of Dark Souls. Of course, this could just be a simple Easter egg, but it's fun to think about. Whatever the case, FromSoft clearly loves their references, and Berserk, and I like talking about them. Hi, welcome to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Elden Ring had a hold on me for the first few months after its release, and I still think about it often. It's one of my favorite games from last year, and I'm super excited for the upcoming DLC. With this video done, I've kind of run out of things to talk about, at least for now. I was really banking on Hollow Knight Silksong releasing soon, but that ship has sailed. But there is one other game I could talk about. Also, sorry for how long this video took to come out. I started to work on it around January, but school and some other pressing matters kept me busy. Also laziness, that too. Anyways, thank you for watching.